Yeah, so we're setting out plans today to protect millions of leaseholders across the country from opaque and unfair service charges and other fees, to ensure that landlords and managing agents are properly held to account for the services they provide and the charges they demand. And it's important we're doing this because while we're still progressing the wider set of reforms necessary to honour our commitment to bring the feudal leasehold system to an end within this Parliament, we know that existing leaseholders out there, subject to unreasonable, unfair practices, are really suffering. They need urgent relief right now, and we're determined to provide it for them.
So give us some explanations, some detail on what these leaseholders that currently feel like they're being taken for a ride, what's the difference that they're going to notice? Because a lot of them that we spoke to, they already get a detailed breakdown of the fees and they're still extortionately high. So how will things change for them?
So things are going to change in two ways. First, we're going to ensure that service charge demands are served in a standardised form. At the moment, landlords, managing agents can serve service charge demands in all variety of forms. There's no standardisation. So leaseholders across the country, once these reforms are enacted, we've got a standardised service charge form with full transparency about costs, both at the point it's served and throughout the process, so that they have a better awareness of how the charges are being calculated, what they're being spent on. And that will allow leaseholders to then more easily challenge unreasonable service charges where they are demanded. And we think correspondingly will act as a disincentive to landlords and managing agents who at the moment, those unscrupulous ones, trying to get away with serving charges for services not provided, perhaps duplicate charges, and all the other abuses that we know take place in the system.
So there's not going to be some sort of cap?
We're not, we've been very open about the fact we're not going to introduce a cap, largely because we think doing so would be detrimental to the interests of leaseholders themselves. Let me give you an example. Say leaseholders have taken control of their building, they've enfranchised, and they decide collectively they need to repair the roof. If the costs of repairing that roof are beyond the cap, we're placing them in a really difficult situation. So we know it's the case that service charges are calculated for a variety of reasons. There's a variety of cost inputs. We've got to ensure those charges are reasonable, and the proposals in the consultation will ensure that they are, but a cap is not the way we're going.
And how is that system for challenging managing agents, how is that going to be improved?
Well, through the changes we're announcing as part of this package, we're taking the first step towards strengthening the regulation of managing agents, specifically by introducing mandatory professional qualifications for them. At the moment, the managing agent sector is a bit of a wild west, so there's good practice out there, but we know that far too many leaseholders are suffering from poor practice and abuse at the hands of unscrupulous managing agents. So this is the first step to strengthening regulation in the area, but further reform is to come.
Okay. Why has this taken so long? Because there was a promise that this was going to be one of the first things that you did in government, and it feels like it's dragged a little bit. What's got in your way?
I wouldn't accept that it's dragged. Switching on the...
I think you said you were going to do it in the first 100 days.
We made very clear throughout the election that we wouldn't be able to honour that 100-day commitment, not least because the measures passed by the previous government in the previous Parliament weren't as ambitious as we expected. So the 2024 Act that we got through, yes, involved some useful new rights and protections. We're determined to switch those on, but it didn't go particularly far. So we've got to take forward, through primary legislation, the wider reforms necessary to bring the system to an end. You can't do that in 100 days. But as I said, we're very also determined to provide relief to existing leaseholders now by switching on the provisions that are on statute book. That takes time. That's a very complex and extensive programme of secondary legislation. But we're moving at pace, switching those provisions on. A number we've already done. This is the latest and will make a real difference, as I say, to leaseholders in terms of bearing down on those high and rising service charge costs.
Okay. And is there more to do on leasehold? Because this has been such a problematic area for so many years. People that get trapped in the system absolutely hate it and feel like they've been completely shafted. Is there more that you're going to do on this, or is this it?
This is definitely not it. This is just the next step in our programme to switch on all of those existing provisions that are already on the statute book from the previous Parliament. We need to do that at pace. As I said, we've already switched on a number of them. This is the latest. But there's lots more to do. And we're talking about a commitment here to end the feudal leasehold system, which goes back to the Norman era, for good in one parliamentary term. I think that's a really ambitious reform programme, but of course it takes further provision. And we know, for example, that we've got to make changes to the existing leasehold system, but also introduce common hold as the default tenure. And we'll be doing that and making other changes through our draft leasehold and common hold reform bill later this year.
Okay, and just finally, I mean, we've come across so many of these really rogue companies that are very difficult to get hold of. For us, we haven't managed to speak to any of them. For the leaseholders themselves, and they really feel like there are companies within this sector, big companies making a lot of money, that are just milking the system and have been getting away with it for so many years. What do you say to those companies, and what are you doing to make sure they can't keep getting away with it?
Well, I completely accept, and I know from my own postbag as a constituency MP, that far too many leaseholders find themselves at the sharp end of the system. And the system has some inherent inequities in it that do allow leaseholders to be gouged. And we know, as I said, particularly when it comes to managing agents, there are unscrupulous people out there. They are abusing leaseholders, and there's poor practice. The reforms we're announcing today, and further reforms to come, are going to bear down on those types of managing agents, ensure that the sector as a whole is properly regulated.
Bear down in what way? Will they be banned from operating in the sector? We're going to strengthen, as I said, the regulation of managing agents. There's further reform to come. But what we're announcing today is the first initial step: mandatory professional qualifications for managing agents. I think that's a really important measure to bring into force. At the moment, it's somewhat of a wild west out there in terms of managing agents, and lots of your viewers will be experiencing some of the sharp practice that occurs out there. This is the first step, as I said, with further reform to come, to bear down and ensure we're properly regulating all managing agents in the country. So what's your message to those companies?
My message to those companies is reform is coming. Get your house in order. Ensure you're only serving leaseholders with reasonable service charges that are for services that are provided and that are reasonably provided and charged for.